A little introduction by way of who I am. I'm not a Roman Catholic, okay, but that doesn't mean I'm not a Catholic. I belong to a group of Eastern Catholic churches, and in particular, are there any Eastern Catholics here? All right. Okay, so drinks later over here in this building. Okay, so the Ukrainian Catholics are basically Eastern Christian or Eastern Orthodox in spirituality and traditions and theology. And about 400 or 500 years ago, our churches entered into communion with Rome. So we're a small minority within the larger Catholic Church, but we still are part of that Catholic Church. Part of being Eastern Catholic means we retain some of our own traditions. And one of those traditions is our own liturgy, our own particular liturgy, and a tradition of art and architecture. And that religious art is what I'll be talking about today. It's the art of iconography. One of the other things that we inherited too was our own, is our own liturgical calendar. Now there are two types of calendars around in this world. There's the Gregorian calendar, which you are all on now, and you've just started Advent, correct? Everybody you know the new missiles out there, okay? So you all went to church, good, very good. Okay, I see some sister, how come you weren't shaking your head? Did you miss church? Okay, we don't know which sister I was looking at, so it could be Sister Mathilde or Sister Teresa. My church follows an older calendar, called the Julian calendar. So we're not quite in what is known as St. Philip's Fast, or what you call Advent. Your Christmas, or the Nativity, is on December the 25th. Ours is much later. It's on January the 7th. And I say that because one of the icons I'll be talking about is the icon of the Nativity, and hence the particular depiction you have there. But also, I thought it'd be a good icon to talk about as you head into the Christmas season, because Christmas is, starting to go to Christmas parties soon, and you want to impress your friends by talking about icons, I'm sure. Okay, so the first thing I thought would kind of tell you a little bit about the nature of iconography. It's not meant to be photorealistic. It's not meant to be an image like you would see in a photograph. And the simple reason is that icons are meant to share a spiritual reality, a world that has been transformed by the grace of Christ. And think of the transfiguration when Christ ascends the mount and he's transfigured by light, and the disciples can't bear to see the light and they fall. Well, they weren't ready to receive that light. But now we are in the period after the resurrection. We are imbued with that grace of salvation, and we have access to that light, and we see that light imbued within the iconography. So whenever you think of an icon, think of always this notion of light emanating from within the figures. The light emanating from within the landscape, the gold backgrounds. All of this is meant to depict holiness and the light of grace, which we have obtained through Christ, through the resurrection. So that transfigured reality is not a photorealistic reality. It's shown in figures that are sometimes have different proportions. The eyes are very large. You know why the eyes are very large? When you meet somebody, what's the first thing you do? Unless you're extremely bashful, you don't look at their feet. You don't go, hey, how you doing? You look at their eyes and you say, hi, how are you? My name is so-and-so, like your meet and greet here. The eyes become the point of contact. So the eyes in iconography are very important. The mouth, very small in iconography. The forehead and the head, very large. Why? Because of the interior contemplation of the divine that occurs in those figures. The vision of God, very large eyes. The silence that one encounters God in is depicted by that smaller mouth. And so that interior transformation, and instead of showing a regular kind of photorealistic images, is shown through these kind of exaggerations in imagery. When you look at some icons, the figures almost seem to be light, as if they're floating. Well, in heaven, we're not going to be walking around or driving cars. We'll be kind of floating around, angelic spirits. And that's what's meant to be depicted in the icon, a transfigured, grace-filled world. And so those are kind of the basic premises of iconography. Now, you can pray to icons. And icons are not meant to be used as talisman, kind of these superstitious kind of idol things. You don't rub the icons and, hope that the magic will happen. They are meant to be means of communication and means of prayer with God. There are many different kind of slogans that one would attach to iconography. For example, windows to heaven. Icons are called windows to heaven because it's through meditating on them and through praying that we ascend to a relationship through prayer to God. Or icons are sometimes called the eyes of God. And the imagery is also the same. It's by way of a relationship with God. So we use iconography to put us in the presence of God and to really inspire that interior prayer, which ultimately leads to a worship of God. So we venerate the icons. We respect the icons in the same way we respect the scriptures. But that's not enough. Because what is our ultimate goal? It's a relationship with the Son, with the Spirit, and with the Father. So it's a Trinitarian prayer that imbues our lifestyle and our spirituality. And that's common for both East and West. But we just happen to have icons. Now somebody asked me, what about the Western tradition, taking our icons and, using it instead of, they only really belong to the East. Well, I say whatever is good and true and beautiful, feel free to use that in your prayer and your own spirituality. And so hopefully today will inspire you in that way. So there are two types of icons which I'd like to just start talking about. And then we'll talk a little bit about the icon of the Nativity. And let me know when I start going over time, because then I'll stop and get another beer. Okay? So, very good there. Maybe even make Kelly get me a beer for making me come out of here on this night. Okay, I could be doing homework with my children. I should remember I am a father. I've been called a father, Father Jerry or Father Skira. I'm a father, biological father, so I'm a lay person, just like you, even though I teach at a Jesuit college. Okay? The other thing the Jesuits taught me, by the way, is never to smile before Christmas when I meet a new group. That's to make sure that you take me seriously. But I've broken that rule already, and so here we go. Let's look at the first icons of Christ. And I'm going to flip my laptop around here. For some of you are closer, you may be able to see what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
All right, what's the password? Okay.
Probably.
So, no, that's not my name either, okay? So the first icon that I would like you to look at is the uppermost icon. And it's there are four basic types of icons of Christ, and each one has numerous variations. So when you think of an artist, what does the artist do? He creates, or she creates, and is inspired in a particular way to use particular paints. And particular colors and particular composition. It's the same is true for iconography. There are basic patterns, but there are variations. When you build a house, you have walls, a roof, ceiling, but you can paint that house a little bit different on the inside. Here we have kind of looks like a nice orange paint, and then we have some kind of flag behind me. I don't recognize that flag. Okay, I'm kidding. Duke of York Pub. Okay, here we go. The first icon is called the Mandelion, or in Greek, the Acherepoetos, or literally, not made with human hands. And that's the literal translation of the Greek. It basically means an icon that was taken from an imprint of Christ's face. And the story where we hear of this is where Veronica takes a handkerchief and presses it against Christ's face, and the imprint that's left is that icon not made with human hands. And so some people have noticed there are parallels with the Shroud of Turin, but nevertheless, the icon here is typical of icons of Christ. He's got his nice hair parted in the middle, a beard, and sometimes that beard has a little cleft in it, a little fork in it. Notice the eyes, very large eyes, very thin nose, very small mouth. Why? The vision of God, interior transformation, interior knowledge. And this icon, not made with human hands, has many variations. And if we had time, we could go and look through those. Now, the other thing about icons of Christ is you'll always know it's Christ, because within the nimbus, or the halo, as you Westerners call it, is a crucifix, or an image of a crucifix, or the cross. So you have a horizontal bar and one of the vertical bars. And at the bottom of that handout that I gave you, there's a little monogram. It basically Greek letters that say ICXC. And that's the Greek for Jesus Christ. And some icons will have that kind of printed up on the icon, and some won't. And so you'll have to begin to figure out which icons are which. And the legend associated with this icon is King Akbar was miraculously healed by this icon, and he commissioned more icons of it to be made, and hence that tradition in Eastern Christianity has continued to this day. Now here is the second icon in the middle of the page. There are actually two icons, and they're both related to each other. And these are called icons of the Pantocrator. Pantocrator literally means the ruler of all, or the king, right? And there are two variations of this icon. There's either Christ in a bust form, where you only see him from the chest up, or you have him seated on a throne, a heavenly throne. Always within these icons, Christ is holding the scriptures. And in the left icon, the scriptures are closed. In the right icon, up here, if you're looking at it from your, I think that's right. No, the left icon, yeah, okay, it's my other right. Okay, so on the left icon, he's holding the scriptures that are closed. And in the right icon, you see the scriptures are open. And usually that has a passage of significance. Like, I am the way, the truth, and the light. In the beginning was the Word. And there's some kind of hint of a famous passage from the scriptures that's there. Sometimes Christ is holding a scroll. That's also symbolic of being the Word of God, but also the prophetic nature of his ministry, that he will eventually become the Messiah who will rise again and give us eternal life. Okay? In all of these icons, Christ is holding up a hand of blessing. Now, you have to look really, really closely at this to figure out what that actually is. So, and you see Eastern Christian bishops do the same thing with their hands in a sign of blessing when they come out to bless the faithful. They usually hold 3 fingers together and 2 up. And there are various variations, whether you kind of do these 2 fingers or these. Basically, the symbolism of this is the following. The 3 fingers represent... Very good, very good. That'll be on the test on Monday. So the Trinity, represented by the 3 fingers. And the 2 fingers, does anybody know? Yes, the humanity and the divinity of Christ. And so the hand becomes symbolic of the identity of whom the church believes Christ is. One of the Trinity, but also fully God and fully human, who dwelt amongst us. And in some icons, it's very stylized that the hand almost forms the eye of the Iisus Christos, Jesus Christ, and the C of it. Anyway, in this particular icon on the right, you see Christ and has in the background, looks like 3 or 4 concentric circles. And notice how they get darker into the center. They're a little lighter on the outside, but they get darker into the center. That is symbolic of divine mystery, right? On the outside, on the exterior, we have some vision of it. We see it. But as we get closer, it gets darker. There's a sense of the mystery of God, which we still have yet to experience. Okay, and so this icon has many variations of it, and the figures in the background there are symbolic of the 4 evangelists. Okay, and sometimes you have them, sometimes you don't. There are many variations on this icon. You'll see a ton of them. I should point out the icon on the left is an icon of Christ, the Pantocrator, from Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is off in ancient Egypt, and the icon is from the 6th century. Now, this may be an interesting little side fact, and I don't want to digress because I got so many more things to talk about. I got till 10, right? 11? Okay, I can do it. You know I can do it. The icon, there was a period within Eastern Christianity of iconoclasm. Iconoclasm literally means icon smashing, or the destruction of icons, or in the language of hip youth these days, icon dissing. Okay, see, I'm hip with it. One other example of it. And I do have a smartphone, by the way, just to prove it. Okay, very good. So, you remember a couple years ago, there was a large outcry from Islam when a Danish journal or newspaper published pictures of the Prophet of Muhammad, and people in Islam were reacting against that. There was violence, and people were actually killed. And even before the war in Afghanistan, the Taliban had begun to destroy images, religious art from, I think it was the Buddhist tradition. But the same thing happened within Eastern Christianity. There was a period of wide-scale destruction of images, and sometimes the images were completely destroyed, or they were plastered over. And how do we know they were plastered over? Well, because, a couple hundred years later, we discovered that underneath there were other images. And this is one of the images from the 6th century that was not destroyed. So anything before 700, we have very few examples. But after that, we have a number of examples. Okay. Then the final icon I want to show you is the Christ Emmanuel, or God with us. And this is not as common an icon, though you'll see it. Christ is kind of a young adult. He doesn't have a nice mustache like I have, because it's Movember, of course. And he's very youthful. He has a scroll in his hand. Here he's depicted by him standing by himself. And sometimes you'll see him alongside of the Mother of God, standing in front of her in this kind of young adult look. And that's called Christ the Emmanuel. And it harkens back to the incarnation, but also the fact that we recognize within this child, within this God amongst us, someone important, someone sent by God. Okay, so, and then again, there are some inscriptions in there. Sometimes in the nimbus, you'll see 4 Greek letters. They basically look like an O, a W, and a V. Now those are Greek, literally meaning the one who is, or I am, and they refer back to Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush. Moses says, what's up, what's your name? And God responds, I am, or I am who I am. Right? Okay. So, I am that I am. I am that I am. There are various translations and various ways of expressing it. Basically means that God is the one, being and life itself. And there are variations on the icon. Sometimes you'll see the word, the letters, the one, going counterclockwise. Sometimes they'll start at the top and they'll go left to right. And those are ways of determining when the icon was made and which tradition it comes from, whether it's the Slavic or the Greek. Okay, now let's turn to the icons of Mary. And so I'm just going to use this little thing here. And see, I can't multitask and talk, My wife says that all the time. Okay.
Well, that's why you got math.
That's right.
You know the work for you.
Okay. So, the types of icons of the Mary or the Theotokos. Now, the Easterners, the Greeks and the Ukrainians, use this word Theotokos or Bohoroditsa to describe the Mother of God. And in English liturgies, of course, we use the phrase the Mother of God. But there are a number of various icons of the Mother of God. These two are related to each other, but they are slightly different. And I'll tell you what's so different about them. The one on the left is called She Who Shows the Way, Hodegitria. And you can tell it's the one showing the way because she's standing there or sitting, and in her arms is the child Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, and she has a hand that's gently motioning to the Son. So she is showing the way, right, to Christ. Christ is the way. And so this particular icon has various variations, again, different colors, different composition, different proportions of the body, but you basically get the sense of that particular icon, she who shows the way. And you know it's Christ because within the nimbus there's that cruciform symbol. And in this particular icon, it's a little harder to see maybe in your photocopy, but there are those Greek inscriptions saying, I am the one, or the one. And the other interesting thing about the Marian icons is that Mary is always depicted with her head covered in a darker type of maphorion, or an outer robe with decorative gold tassels and 3 stars on her shoulder and forehead, or at least there are implied 3 stars. Sometimes you only see 2. It depends on the composition. And the 3 stars basically imply her perpetual virginity, right? That this means that Christ was incarnate through her by virtue of the Spirit. And that's what the 3 stars mean, and that's what their particular icon shows. Now, the icons, some people say they look a little sad, but they're meant to be somewhat dispassionate, a little calmness, not really sad, not really happy, right? You're contemplating God. And that's the kind of the disposition. Okay, now the icon on the right is perhaps a little bit more blurry. And you may have seen this icon before. It's called the Virgin of Vladimir, but it's not a Russian icon. The Russians actually stole it from the Ukrainians. Okay? So I'm a very sensitive Slav, okay, Ukrainian. So they stole it from the Ukrainians. I just want to make sure that that's on tape and on video. But it's not a Ukrainian icon. It was actually written by a Greek. Notice I said written. The icons, we don't describe them as being painted. We describe them as being written, because it's like the scriptures in theology, in symbols and in color. So the icons are written, not simply painted, written. It's a form of symbolic narrative and discourse. So the icon of the Virgin of Vladimir, which was stolen from the Ukrainians, basically has a different depiction. Notice how here Mary's showing the way to Christ, and Christ is seated. But in this icon, Mary is very much pressed against Christ, and Christ is really pressed against Mary's cheek, or looking to hug her. And this icon is an icon called the mercy or tenderness. It basically is meant to depict the love that existed between the Mother of God and the child Jesus. A very human sentiment, is it not? Between a mother and a child. So on one icon on the right, on the left over here, shows Mary recognizing that this is the Son of God, but on the other side, revealing some of the human dimension of Christ, of one who was incarnate, lived and dwelt amongst us, who grew in wisdom and in stature. That's in the Bible, by the way. You can look that up, so that people never say that Catholics don't know anything from the Scriptures. Okay, so again, now that we finished with that icon that was stolen from the Ukrainians, okay, thank you very much. I'm here Thursday too. Try the veal. That's from the movie Shrek, so I do watch other stuff. Okay, but that's another thing. Another type of icon is the one on the bottom left of your sheet, called the Mother of God enthroned. And it's kind of like that icon we've seen of the Pantocrator, where Mary is seated, and on her lap is an Emmanuel child. And in this particular icon, we see the 2 archangels, Michael and Gabriel. They're everywhere in these icons, whether they're on the iconostasis, which is like an icon screen in front of the altar, or in various icons where we have the Mother of God or John the Baptist, and they're offering homage to Christ. You always see Gabriel and Michael. Very important, these patron saints and these archangels. And in this particular icon, we see the same type of imagery that we see in the other 2 icons, the cross within the nimbus, and Mary with her maphorion, the head covered, a form of reverence, the 3 stars. And some of these, in some of these icons, you'll sometimes see, beside Christ, an image of a mountain and a ladder. And have you ever been to Regis College? Anybody been to Regis College here in the chapel? Okay, Kelly has. Okay, so somebody goes to church over there. I know Sister McTill. You should put your hand up because you've been there. There's an icon of Mary with the Christ child seated, and that mountain with the ladder. So think of the ladder of ascent to God, but also when Moses goes up to the mountain, he encounters God. He comes back with something, right? Anybody seen the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston? That's a classic movie. You got to see it, because that's the image I get when I think about this story of the of the mountain and the Decalogue. So Moses goes up the mountain, has this discourse with God. The Decalogue is handed over to Moses. So Moses comes down with the 10 Commandments, right? The law. Well, Christ in these icons is the new law, the new covenant, the new relationship that is established. And that's why in some of these icons you see him, see alongside of Christ the image of a mountain, a very small mountain, a little bit of clouds and a ladder, kind of like Jacob's ladder. And the final icon of Mary is the one where she is in a orans position. Orans means prayer, an offering of God up to God. And so people do that in the Catholic Church, and when they say the Our Father, it's basically an uplift emotion and symbolic representation of your prayer being offered up to God. And that's that particular icon where you have a Christ child, Emmanuel, also seated in front there. And those kind of odd things that look on the left and the right, those are symbolic of the cherubim and the seraphim, and angels, right? So they're in the presence of the angelic hosts. This is liturgical imagery that the Eastern Christians adopt when they think about prayer to God and to Christ. And it's all in our liturgy. We talk about it all the time. Okay, so those are basically the 4 types of icons of Mary. So now that when you go into a church, Eastern church, you'll be able to kind of figure out which icons of Christ and which ones are of Mary and what they mean in particular. Now, if we had time, we can talk about various depictions of saints. You know, some saints are depicted as bishops or patriarchs of churches. They look like they're wearing episcopal attire. Monastic women are dressed like the Mother of God in kind of darker colors. Some of them have gone by way of martyrdom, and they carry a cross as a symbol of that martyrdom. Saint Paraskevia, for example, who has also my grandmother's name. I thought I'd mention her here. Okay, good. So 5 minutes. Very good. You started late. I get another 10 minutes. Okay. Good. So now the final icon that perhaps it may be important for your to kind of talk about in your groups, and I know I've given you these questions you can talk about for hours and hours, but I'd like to talk a little bit about this icon of the Nativity. And so one of the questions I always ask is this seen in the Bible? And it's a bit of a trick question, because icons sometimes will do a little bit of a theological interpretation of an event. Now we know the Nativity story, Christ, Joseph and Mary are looking around for a place. They get rejected everywhere, so Christ is eventually born in a manger, right? Okay. Well, in this icon there is no manger. The scriptural narrative of Christ being born of Mary is contained in here, but Christ now, however, is being born in a cave. And it looks like he's kind of in a sarcophagus. Instead of swaddling clothes, it looks like he's wrapped in burial clothes. You see the 3 wise guys, or wise men, actually they're cut off in the picture, there's only 2 of them. They're part of the scripture narrative, right? You have the shepherds, and I think I cut them off also a little bit there, but they're part of the scriptural narrative. But what is the theological interpretation here? Notice the mountain again. Divine ascent, but also divine descent. Christ becomes the new law. Christ is born in the cave. Think of Genesis and the formation of Adam and Eve. God made them from what? The dust of the earth, right? And so Christ is born out of this earth, and that cave is symbolic of that darkness. The light shone in the darkness. Christ is in that darkness. But he's also the light who shines in that darkness. And one of the sad and most tragic things about this icon is the fact that Christ is depicted almost, it looks like, in a coffin, a sarcophagus. Because the paradox that is meant to be displayed here is that this birth leads to a death, which ultimately leads to a new life. So that's the theological interpretation that's meant to be conveyed in this particular icon. And here, Mary is kneeling in veneration to Christ and in worship of Christ. In some icons, she's laying down in a symbolic gesture of the reality of that birth. And she's sometimes looking at this poor figure down into the left of that icon. And that poor figure, he looks like he's wondering, what's up with this? That's Joseph. Bless you. Bless you. Joseph is kind of wondering, he becomes symbolic of all of us, right? You know, wondering and contemplating the mystery of this. You know, God being born amongst us, God being born and coming down and living amongst us. So he becomes symbolic of our own doubt, but also symbolic of accepting that reality. And that little shady figure beside him is sometimes kind of the symbolic of the devil, kind of tempting him into disbelief. Now, one other last thing that I should point out in this icon is there's a scene in the bottom right-hand corner. There are two women holding a baby, a child. That child is Christ. And so icons are not meant to be kind of just simple snapshots in time. They can convey many events within one narrative. And in this particular narrative, Christ is being washed. One of the midwives is sticking her hand into the water to test it, make sure it's not too cold or not too hot, right? Reality of the birth. God dwelt amongst us. Christ became human, incarnate. God became human, incarnate. But also, look where Christ is being washed. It kind of looks like a baptismal font. So all of these symbols of new birth come to play within this particular icon. The light shining in the darkness, and there's a little ray of heaven to show that this is a manifestation of God amongst us. So, on that, you'll have to take my course if you want to know more. It's actually on Thursdays too. So